From shaving a couple of years off their age to literally forging birth certificates, people in basketball have gone to wild lengths to lie about how old they are.
On the high school basketball court, he played like a man among boys because he was a man among boys.
One player's dad faked his son's age to make him look like a prodigy. Another person used the devastation caused by a hurricane to play high school ball all over again. And another person potentially committed immigration fraud, sparking an international incident. It sounds crazy, but believe it or not, age fraud in basketball is more common than you'd think. From desperate amateurs to actual NBA players, age fraud has become a very real and sometimes successful strategy. And in the higher levels of basketball, where millions of dollars are involved, the temptation to lie about your age can be too big. And this was exactly the case for UCLA standout Shabbaz Muhammad.
Can you clarify if there was a report about your age? How old are you?
Yeah, I'm 20 years old. I mean, I have my license. I never declared I wasn't 20. I don't know where that went. I mean, that's like I said, I'm mature. I'm going to talk for myself now.
In the early 2010s, Shabbaz Muhammad was widely regarded as a #1 high school player in the country. He was a McDonald's All-American, averaged 30 points per game, and was constantly compared to NBA stars like James Harden and Carmelo Anthony. Shabbaz was a can't-miss prospect. However, there was one problem. Shabbaz wasn't just dominating the competition, he might have been older than half of it. On March 22, 2013, the LA Times released a report that Shabbaz was not his stated age of 19, but was actually 20 years old. During the investigation, the LA Times reporters had found Shabbaz's official birth certificate that stated that he was born in 1992. And this was a problem as all his school records stated that he was born in 1993. Now, when the report initially came out, some people believed that all this could have been a typo or mistake. However, it soon came out that this was not the case. And this was due to Shabbaz's father, Ron Holmes. Since Shabbaz had been young, his dad had groomed him for NBA superstardom and had hired the best trainers, put him in good basketball situations, and had specifically married Shabbaz's mom to, quote, make some All-Americans. Ron was absolutely invested in Shabbaz's career, and this amount of investment made people suspect that he had purposely lied about Shabbaz's age to give him a competitive advantage. And this suspicion turned out to be true. When LA Times reporters contacted Holmes about the birth certificate discrepancy, Holmes initially denied the claims. However, a few minutes later, Holmes openly admitted that the claims were true. And what was even more damning was that he attempted to bribe the reporters to suppress the story. Holmes said things like, "We can team up," or "I'm going to need a publicist anyway, why not you?" However, there was no publicist alive that would be able to save Holmes because once the story was released, it blew up with people nationwide learning about Shabbaz's real age and subjecting Shabbaz to endless trolling and affecting his draft stock. Before the scandal, Shabbaz had been projected to still be a top 10 pick, but after the news of his age dropped, he fell in the draft and was drafted 14th overall by the Minnesota Timberwolves. As much as Holmes had lied about Shabbaz's age to get him the best career possible, it ended up having the opposite effect and negatively impacted his career. However, even his weird father-son age conspiracy doesn't come close to this next guy who potentially committed immigration fraud to have a competitive advantage. Most people know Ersan Ilyasova as a solid role player that played 12 years in the NBA. However, before his life in the NBA, he was a rising star in Turkey that many NBA scouts thought was one of the best international prospects. However, during his rise, he became embroiled in an international scandal. In 2003, reports started to emerge that Ersan may not be who he said he was, and this was due to a weird set of circumstances. On August 7, 2002, an Uzbekistani basketball player born in 1984 named Ersan Ilyasova entered Turkey and then seemingly vanished. 1 month later, a Turkish man named Semşetin Bulut told authorities he'd forgotten to register his 15-year-old son. The name he chose for the paperwork? Ersan Ilyasova. This registration was officially recognized by the Turkish government, and both the name and birth date, March 15, 1987, was the same as NBA prospect Ersan Ilyasova. Because of all this, Turkish news organizations started to claim that Ersan and Ersan were the same person. They even claimed that they had obtained copies of the actual immigration and registration papers, and the situations were too lined up to be coincidental. Alongside this, people speculated that because Ersan was born in 1984, but Ersan was said to be born in 1987, that he had lied about his age just to have a competitive advantage over younger kids. kids. And these allegations became big enough to the point where even the Uzbekistan Basketball Federation filed an official protest with FIBA. Ersan for years denied that any of these allegations were true, but he had to endure constant questions and jokes at his expense. However, in the end, FIBA ended up ruling that there was not enough evidence to prove the validity of the claims, and Ersan was allowed to continue playing. In the end, Ersan might have been innocent, or maybe he just got lucky, but this kind of story didn't stop with him. In fact, one player went even further, faking his identity, dominating high school basketball, and ending up on the sex offender registry.
So were you surprised you was able to get away with this shit for so long?
Hell yeah, like everybody know me, like a lot of people know me.
In 2017, 17-year-old Rashawn Richardson was his high school team's leading scorer, was voted as his district's Offensive Player of the Year, and was even being scouted by various colleges. Rashawn's future was bright, and his journey through basketball seemed like it was going to be a feel-good story. But there was one problem, and it was that Rashawn was actually 26. In 2017, Sydney Gilstrap Portley assumed the fake identity of a teenager named Rashawn Richardson.
Rashawn is my son's middle name, and Richardson is a family name, so nigga, I had a whole master plan.
During this time, Hurricane Harvey had devastated parts of Texas, and a special program had been set up allowing displaced students to transfer schools with minimal paperwork. Sydney saw this program as an opportunity, and he took it, creating a false identity and enrolling in Hillcrest High in Dallas. During his time there, he dominated in basketball, dropping 30-point games, becoming a local star, and even gaining sympathy as a refugee athlete. However, the truth eventually came out, and one of his former coaches recognized him during a tournament. Because of this, Sydney's facade unraveled, and he was not only charged with fraud, but also with indecency with a child because he was found to be dating a 14-year-old girl while posing as a student. Because of all this, Sydney was charged with 6 years probation and was registered as a sex offender. And why did he do all this? Well, no one really fully knows, but people that were around him speculated he wanted a second chance at basketball or just liked the intention. However, Sydney Gilstrap Portley wasn't the first adult to fake his age and sneak into high school basketball. In fact, one of the most infamous cases happened nearly a decade earlier, and it ended with actual prison time.
I couldn't imagine not playing basketball right now.
Jerry Joseph is the player's name, or allegedly.
In late 2007, Gerdwich Montemere was a standout basketball player at his Florida high school and had even secured a scholarship to play at a JUCO in Iowa. But in the summer of 2008, he told his coaches he was visiting family in Haiti and then vanished. Friends, teammates, and family didn't hear from him again, but 5 months later in Odessa, Texas, he resurfaced. However, he no longer went by Gerdwich Montemere, but as Jerry Joseph. And even though Gerdwich was actually 20 years old, he told everyone he was just 15. By using a fake Haitian birth certificate, he claimed to be a Haitian orphan and eventually ended up enrolling at Permian High School, the same school made famous by Friday Night Lights. And at 6'5" with legitimate basketball skills, Gerdwich quickly caught the attention of Permian's basketball coach, Danny Wright. Wright and his family had sympathy for Gerdwich's situation and quickly took him in, providing food, shelter, and a stable home environment. Danny would later say that Gerdwich was just a big goofy kid and that nothing felt off. On the court, Gerdwich thrived, quickly earning a starting spot, leading a typically underperforming team to the state playoffs, and even was named District Newcomer of the Year. Everything seemed to be going perfect for Gerdwich. However, everything soon fell apart. In 2010, during an AAU tournament in Arkansas, one of Gerdwich's former coaches spotted him. He tried calling out to him multiple times, but Gerdwich kept walking away, clearly nervous. However, this didn't deter the coach, as he said it was unmistakable. This kid talked like, walked like, and even sweated like Gerdwich Montemere. Back in Florida, the coach contacted Permian High and told him that their rising star Jerry Joseph was likely an impostor. And because of this, administrators started digging. They compared photos of Jerry and Gerdwich, and the resemblance was undeniable. When confronted, Gerdwich denied everything, but then his coach's wife found a passport and social security card with his real name in his room. This was enough for the school to call immigration officers, and he was arrested, but he still wouldn't admit the truth. However, when investigators found overwhelming evidence, including more documents linking his identity and multiple eyewitnesses, Gerdwich finally caved and confessed. However, the situation only got worse. After the truth of Gertwich's identity came out, a 15-year-old girl stepped forward saying she slept with Gertwich before knowing he was actually 20. Up to this point, people have been split on Gertwich, with some people even bailing him out of jail because he was still seen as a good kid. However, with that revelation, sympathy for him vanished. Gertwich was charged with 6 felony counts, including identity theft, tampering with government records, and sexual assault. In the end, he took a plea deal, served 3 years in prison, and was registered as a sex offender. And he did all this, all to shave 5 years off his life.